Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very special session that we are organizing. My name is Ratana Chinbhakdi, and I'm directing the 2 Big Techno Partnership. And we are having really such a pleasure to be here with everyone to really look at this very special publication, which is part of the TBTI Global Book Series. We're putting this book series together to make sure that the work of many great people that we admire are accessible to people. So it's open access, it's an ebook, so it would be different from other academic books or publication in the sense that it can tell stories that the authors might always wanted to tell, but not sure to what forum. So this book series offers that. So we have been publishing quite a few books in this series. For the session today on the theme of change and resilience, this is really a great opportunity to highlight this very important book by the author that we know very well, Professor Fikret Burgess. And you can read, if you have read the book and you have looked at the author, look at the little biography in the back, or based on other work that Fikret has done, you will see that Fikret covers so many topics in so many parts of the world. So when we ask Fikret whether he would be interested in writing a book for TBTI Global Book Series, I don't know whether Fikret took long or not to think about what it means to put a book like this together. But one thing that I say to Fikret is that whatever you wanted to tell us, we would love it anyway. So in that sense, right, we really have this valuable book now in our hands. You can download that from TBTI Global website and enjoy reading that if you haven't done so. But I'm sure a lot of people have read it, still might have a question like I do. Why this book? Why? And what you wanted to achieve with it. So for tonight, I would like to just invite Fikret to talk about the book, and then we would have other speakers as well. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Fikret. And well, Fikret, would you like to just turn on your microphone and the camera, and then tell us why the book and what you really want to communicate with it. Turn your camera on too, please. That's great. Thank you. Hello, Fikret. You're joining us from Winnipeg?
I'm joining you from Winnipeg, indeed.
Right. And in Thailand, the place you like, but sorry you're not here, but I'm sure that is going to be the case for a little bit because Thailand is not the best place to be at this time. Canada is probably a lot better. So Fikret, I really need to ask you this question, right? Because I mean, you have written so many things, you have done, really covering so many aspects, so many topics. I'm just curious, why you put this book together, and what went in your mind when you were putting it together?
Yes, thanks, Ratana. It actually was easy to make the decision, although not so easy to put the book together. TBTI has this great series, and it started with Sven Jentoft's book, which was such a good read. I wrote a review of it, and I don't usually write reviews, and I really enjoyed reading it. And I said, what would it look like if I did something similar? So that started it in my mind. The idea of a book that's accessible to everyone is also very appealing. For those of you who are book writers, academic books don't make any money anyway. So why not make it open access and make it freely available to everyone? And of course, this is based on previous writings. So I thought, that would be easy. But in fact, it wasn't so easy because I ended up doing a lot of rewriting, a lot of editing. Ratana is famous for delivering instructions with a smile. And she said, of course, these papers should not be very long. So that I have to cut down on the size of the papers. And she said, well, concepts should be introduced simply in a readable language. So I had to rewrite all that. And then she said, of course, not too many references because it sort of gets in the way of reading. So I had to cut down on the number of references, which was really difficult because I'm used to writing papers with a lot of references. So by the time I finished addressing Ratana's instructions, it was a very different kind of thing. The other question, of course, was should there be a central theme? Of course, small-scale fisheries. But much of my work is not necessarily just small-scale fisheries, it's community-based management. So then it involved a number of additional areas, which I think is relevant to small-scale fisheries, as well as to forestry, grazing lands, wildlife, protected areas, topics like resilience, which is what we're focusing on today, but there's more than that. There's commons, co-management, and so on. And then looking for a theme that unifies it, I picked on the Jean-Jacques Rousseau idea from the 1700s, actually, of the social contract. Just 2 days ago, one of the people I was corresponding with was saying, well, like we've used that term in Chile. Is that where you picked it up? I said, no, I picked it up in 1700s, although I'm actually not that old, I should assure you. So the idea of a social contract, again, there's more discussion to come, but very briefly, this is the agreement between the state and the citizen as to what the mutual obligations are, and it's changing. And when you see the small scale fisheries community-based management scene for a while, you notice that in fact there's a change going on. It's not very fast change, but it's a fundamental change, and that's what I wanted to focus on.
Wow, that's great. So there must be a time when you wonder whether, something that you wrote some time ago, but is still relevant today in the context, even in the context of change. And then, what does it tell us if that, when you started to make that kind of observation? Because some of the papers you have written, right, some of the concepts that have been there for some time. So are we making good progress then, or we are still kind of like going around and not doing enough?
Well, yeah, having the papers together actually makes a difference because they're edited together, so they sort of read as if they were written one after another, but in fact they're not. The historical background for the social contract doesn't appear until chapter 8, and it's a 1990 paper, which was probably not seen, not even by my students, because I don't ever remember assigning that paper, but that's where it is. Of course, it does show up at the introduction. The concept of social contract does show up in the introduction, but it's not really developed until the middle of the book. Chapter 8 is more or less the middle of the book. So it's interesting how writing books write themselves in a way. You do have to start with a plan, but then you have to let the book write itself. And in this case, putting the chapters together and editing them takes its own life, its own momentum. As Ratana well knows, she's the author and editor and co-editor of a whole bunch of books.
Right. So this is a great. This is really something that could inspire many of us, right, to trying to do the same. But of course, maybe we'll have to wait a few years before we get to the level where we can have enough material so that we can go back and revisit and almost like refreshing it with this kind of idea that we go back and think about. I know that we have a lot of audience too, and I'm pretty sure many people would like to say quite a few things. So, but we have invited a few people to just join our conversation here. I would start with the first guest for tonight. And the question that I have posed to our guests actually is, their connection to you, Fikret, and what their favorite chapter of your book. So my first guest is Melissa Marsh. Melissa, go ahead, please. Hi.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the invite, and it's wonderful to be here. When Fikret shared this book with me, I completely went down memory lane because I was a student of Fikret's in the 2000s, but I had actually first come to know his work in the 1990s when I did environmental studies at Trent. And in fact, Fikret, that alternatives article, The Paradigms Lost, your chapter 8, was actually assigned in one of my courses. And I remember that, and it was so neat to see this book and to be reminded of that chapter. Because I think you often assigned us the tragedy of the commons 22 years later in your commons course. And so those two early pieces from the 1990s really influenced my choice to work with Fikret. As I said, I came in the early 2000s to work with Fikret after I'd had some field experience in Cambodia working on community-based management. And I really wanted to then do the theoretical thinking around commons and livelihoods and resilience. And that's when I got to work with Fikret and be mentored by him. For my favorite chapter, I struggled because I thought about chapter 8, but I think the chapter that's really influenced my work is actually his chapter on roving bandits from 2006. And so this was just after I'd finished my PhD, but it's a paper I keep returning to because it really looks at the links of globalization, markets, and market demand and exploitation, and kind of puts it on this table, this idea of roving bandits, particularly around industrial fishing. And it's a concept that we can use among many resources and not just fish. And so it's something that's remained really relevant, and I think was the early thinking around adding in political economy to commons thinking. So I very much still appreciate it today and continue to actually assign it in my classes. I could go on, but I will let others say something. So yes, thank you.
That's
and
great.
delighted to see the book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. So the next guest is Prateep. Same question. What's the connection and why, and what chapter is your favorite?
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's such a great pleasure to be in a session with Fikret and Melissa and Renga, and of course, being moderated by Ratana Yu. My connection with Fikret goes back to 20 years. I met Fikret in Chiang Mai in Thailand, where you are, Ratana, in a conference. And I was working in community-based forest management at the time, not knowing what literature means on those critical subjects that I was working, but I was presenting a paper which was on adaptive co-management of community forestry. So actually he came and talked to me. He probably was surprised that someone working in an NGO coming and talking about adaptive co-management, which was his one of the top subject areas of research at that point in time. So within a year, I ended up in Winnipeg, and soon I realized that I ended up in one of the best gurukuls of the world, and later I started to call it Berkey School. And he then, in my own connections with him, he then became like the Rousseau's, social contract, big, beautiful oak tree under which many decisions of life have taken place, and brought me where I am today. There are three levels of connections that I would like to just mention. One is that, it is extraordinarily academic because of the work that we have done together. It is deeply human. I remember something Mina always tells us, that, he looks at his students as his academic children, and I am proud to say that, I am an academic child of Fikret, and I have no remorse in saying that. And the third point that I want to mention is that, our connection is the respect for the rebel, and the camaraderie that, that comes in a rebel and kind of relationship, and I respect that. My favorite chapter, I would say, the book is a masterpiece. But my favorite chapter is chapter 1, because it tells his story. It is about him. It is his intellectual autobiography, as he says. It is about introducing the rebel, and what can be a great, other than this, what can be an opportunity to know the person first, and then get into all the 20 chapters to know about the social contract. So that's my most favorite chapter. Thank you.
That's great, Prateep. Thank you. Okay, so another guest that we have for tonight is another student, former student of 5th grade. This is Iranka. Would you like to share with us the connection and also your favorite chapter?
Hi, everyone. Ratana, thank you for having me here. And yes, my connection also with 5th grade goes beyond the usual supervisor connection, like Prateep explained. So I considered him as my guru. And I started my master's in 2011 with 5th grade. And when I come to 5th grade's lab, I have no idea what is academia is, and I don't know how to even properly talk to people. And I learned so many things from 5th grade and his lab. And so after my master's, 5th grade became a part of my PhD committee as well. And we did some collaborative work as well, produced a series of publications. And when it comes to this book, I'll keep this very short. And my favorite, because it is very difficult to find a one favorite chapter in 5th grade books. For example, in one of my previous favorite books, The Secret Ecology, I like all of the chapters. And so same here, it's a very relevant book for my work. And because you asked me to choose one chapter, I'm going to say the section 4, chapters 12 to 15, it's talk about Indigenous peoples and traditional ecological knowledge. And it's answer the questions, why traditional knowledge and why Indigenous people, and how we should, how we can incorporate Indigenous knowledge into a new social contract. And yeah, so I'm choosing that because you asked me to. So, but everything is relevant for my work, and it's always good to read and enrich my knowledge based using 5th grade's books. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, I know, like I said, we have a lot of people in the audience, and if anyone would like to, send a chat, say hello, or if you really cannot wait any longer, you wanted to raise your hand and wanted to say something and wanted to tell us what chapter you'd like, we might be able to give you a little bit of time. Okay, so this is a very casual and informal session. So just as I said, now we have one. That's interesting, right? Oh, Rashid. Let me allow Rashid to speak. Go ahead, Rashid. You have the microphone.
Yeah, hello everybody. Good to see your faces. Fikret. It's wonderful. I just came to see you guys, and I have a meeting starting really very soon. So thank you for allowing me to talk. There's a lot of nice things to say about Fikret. Fikret I won't talk direct about your book. Actually, The Roving Bandit is one of the key things that got my attention. It's such a beautiful piece. But I just want to tell you about one evening when I appeared at the university, and I went to Fikret's group, and we're having lots of nice talk. He's on an advisory panel of Ocean Canada, our partnership grant, which is just closing up. Then we started talking, and I mentioned Google Scholar, and Fikret, what is that, Rashid? Come, let's go. So we went to his computer, and we looked and installed, put him on there, and then boom, when he appeared, he was the most cited scientist at the University of Manitoba. And and that puts him on top of the Canadian list and whatever list you want to take. This was such a pleasant surprise, isn't it, Fikri? It was such a nice experience, and I still remember that afternoon. Thank you for your contributions, and yeah, we keep going. You have many more years of helping young scholars to find their way. Thank you, and bye for now.
Thanks so much, Rashid. Of course, this was not really meant to be anything like well, I mean, figured you did retire, but anyway, you're still going strong, so which we like. But right, so let's turn our conversation a little bit to the question that we are posting, right, for the theme for the open house today, which is all about change and resilience. So maybe we can just do those two questions together in the interest of time. You must have seen a lot of key changes in the small-scale fisheries around the world in the context of the research that you're doing. And maybe you can just speak briefly about that and see whether there's any hope, any kind of, what it means for the small-scale fisheries to be resilient is what needs to happen. Okay, so why don't we start with you, if you can, so if you can just choose a couple places and or general overview about the kind of change that you observe in small-scale fisheries, and whether you think we have what's the potential for small-scale fisheries to be resilient. Your microphone, please, Fikret.
Yeah, hard to encapsulate changes because it's so different in different parts of the world. But the point is, they're still alive. Small-scale fisheries are alive and well, and they're providing local food, and they are providing local work, meaningful work. Your first book author in the global TBTI series, Sven, really analyze this much better on what it means to have fishing communities and how they relate to the rest of the world. My experience is broad, but it's sort of sporadic. I've seen small-scale fisheries go down, for example, in Turkey. It used to be the dominant coastal fishery, but now these seasonal large boat fisheries come and they just scoop up all the fish. But then paradoxically, in places like Maine in the US, the Gulf of Maine, they're still strong. The lobster fishery is small scale around Nova Scotia, probably Newfoundland. I haven't been there for a while. Still very strong. It's difficult to see a pattern, but what's happening is that they're higher profile. They're taking care of their own business, but they're also being heard. And this of course shows up in the Indigenous fishery for lobsters in Nova Scotia. But then there is a battle going on between two different groups of small-scale fisheries, which is somewhat counterproductive. So it's a very complicated picture. In British Columbia, small-scale fisheries are there. But then again, there is competition between different kinds of groups of fishers, and it's not doing very well. The overall pattern, though, is that the small-scale fisheries have a different kind of relationships with the government. They are being recognized as being able to run their own business. They're able to self-regulate. So it's not a very Garrett Hardin kind of view, but more of a Jean-Jacques Rousseau kind of view. We'll probably come back at the end to this, but the big complication here is that there's also free trade and neoliberal policies that's really making it difficult for local fisheries or local anything really, and it's giving advantage to larger enterprises, global enterprises. My colleagues in Sweden are finding that something like 10 companies in the world control about a third of large stock fisheries. That's just horrendous. And of course, the management is moving to a more of a neoliberal kind of management with quota management, which is appropriate for large fisheries, but I don't think would ever work with small fisheries. So I'll stop there, but I know there are people in the audience who would want to comment on that.
Thank you. Melissa, what about you? Because you've been working in quite a few places as well in the small-scale fisheries world. What are the main changes that you have observed, and are we seeing good sign, bad, positive, negative?
Well, most of my work is in Asia, Southeast Asia, and so there, I think small-scale fisheries they absolutely continue to persist, but it's precarious work for the most part, and it's challenging in part because of industrial fisheries, and there just not being huge amounts left over when you have so much trawling going on. That said, the movement towards blue justice is really encouraging, and you do see examples of communities coming together, unionization, really advocating for rights, which is really encouraging. And so it's actually rather amazing that they persist in spite of the odds, given the overall sustainability challenge. And the other thing we see is a lot of people have one foot in fishing and one foot in something else. And so it becomes almost like the retirement strategy, right? So you'll go back to the fishing village and you'll do some fishing and it'll be for subsistence, but it won't be your entire livelihood. And so we see a lot of diverse livelihoods around fishing. So it remains really important.
And the ability to be able to diversify that portfolio would have to be there, right? Because sometimes we have this tendency to organize a sector and then turn them into some kind of profession, and that reduces or minimizes that other opportunities for gainful employment, right? Prateep, in your case, could you share with us what you think about what's happening in the small-scale fisheries? Sorry, microphone, please.
On the same line as Fikrit and Melissa, we're reflecting, most of my work has been on the Bay of Bengal coast, especially focusing on Jellicoe Lagoon, but other experiences, of research elsewhere also. What we're seeing is that, from being trapped, small-scale fisheries, from being trapped, are wanting to come out, now, so it's not like, you are in your context, there is lots of, pressure, and then you are, trying to, suffer and marginalized, stay marginalized, but there's a lot of action, and there is a lot of desire to come out, and therefore there's a lot of connection and collaboration that is happening. So small-scale fisheries, in the context that I work, have come out of their context to fight for their rights and the wants. But also there are dominant trends, and I will capture those in 3 bullet points. One is the nature of change that was there is itself changing, so which is crucial. Because you need to understand change in order to respond to that. So if you don't understand it, then it becomes beyond your capacity. So the nature of change is very fast changing. It is fast, significant, sometimes irreversible. The nature of drivers or the enemies are changing. So small-scale fisheries have been fighting with the enemies within, for example, the caste system and other kinds of things. But at the same time, the enemies outside, so the nature of the enemies are changing. So that poses really strong challenges. But the third one is change is taking place everywhere. It's not only SSF. And to your point, so that limits the ability to diversify. So if there is something that happens in small-scale fisheries, people would go into another sector to live, earn a livelihood. But that is being restricted because negative change is taking place in all sectors. And therefore the competition to available, options in those sectors, is very limited to small-scale fisheries. So there is, huge competition, and there is huge inability of people to opt for alternate livelihoods. But at the same time, there is really strong power and strong, movement towards survival, towards, action, and towards, better outcomes. And therefore, people have been engaging and still have the ability to engage in, understand their vulnerability and move towards more sustainable futures, more resilient futures, and more viable futures. And that movement is very, very strong at this point in time, everywhere that I have worked in my personal capacity. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. So there's something definitely quite positive. So we have to remember, right, that there's always that possibility. So thank you for bringing that up. Iranga, in your case, what do you say?
Yeah, my experience with small-scale fisheries limits to only 3 cases. One from Canadian Arctic Inuit small-scale fisheries, and the Sri Lankan coastal Wadda culture-based fisheries, and Sri Lankan community-based shrimp aquaculture operations. So when it comes to community-based shrimp aquaculture operations, one of the key changes they experience is the disease problem, how disease spreading patterns change, and so within the context of multiple other stresses like climate change and market-related changes. And the resilience in that case is for them is to self-organize and create their own calendar system and face to that challenges. And so far they're going like they're continuously improving their resilience in terms of their production and the business survival rates. So when it comes to indigenous fishery systems in Canadian Arctic and Sri Lanka, for my PhD, I did a comparative analysis to see whether how they experience different stressors and how they respond to those stressors in small-scale fisheries context. So what I found is, so in terms of experience change, these global north and south small-scale fishery systems, there are so many different ways of experience change. In Arctic, that sea ice changes and changes in marine food webs and so many different changes. But in Sri Lanka, it's very complicated. So many political changes, social conflicts, human-elephant conflicts, and a lot of extreme events. So, but there are similarities when it comes to the way they respond small-scale fishery systems to those changes. Like Pradeep and Melissa said, diversification is one of the key strategies, and also co-management highlighted as one of the another strategy, and combine different kinds of knowledge using new technology. And another area I think we have to give more focus on what are the limits for resilience, what are the limits for building resilience, and how to identify barriers to building resilience. I think it's an important angle to examine more in small-scale fisheries.
Thank you so much, Ranga. So I forgot to mention, right? This session is actually pretty short, and it's unfortunate that I think we could have another hour, still would have a really wonderful conversation. And I just really wanted to, it's going to end in about 5 to 7 minutes. But I really wanted to, again, think about the audience who might want to say something. And I know that there's been some chat happening. So let me see here. I think Tony's in the audience. Perhaps Tony Charles would like to say something, because there is a point that is important to remember about the work that actually both Tony and now we have Derek Johnson saying the same thing. But Tony, please, if you'd like to say very briefly the point that you wanted to make. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Ratna. I hope I'm able to be heard. I really just wanted to highlight the Sacred Ecology book and the connections to Fikret's latest book. For me, when we're thinking about things that are inspiring, for me, the Sacred Ecology book is just such a guidance to how to think about the world and how to show respect, basically. And so I just wanted to raise that as an important point. But not to say that, I don't want to compare it with Fikret's latest book, because as I said in my note, I think the spirit is the same that Fikret's conveying in both of those. And, that spirit of respect for people and for livelihoods and you know, for conservation as well, but that balance that's there, that's really reflected so well through that sacred ecology perspective. So I just wanted to say that. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, so I have another last question really for the panelists here, and I would now reverse the order. But basically, I wanted to get your sense about what you think about this the book title, right? Toward a New Social Contract. What is it about, and what does it look like, and what do we need to do to get there? So Iranga, can we start with you? Sorry, your microphone, please.
Yeah, I think in this book, Fikret laid the foundation for readers to visualize and build and support our new social contract for small-scale fisheries. And so I like to highlight few items I like to include in new social contracts. For example, space-specific approaches, transdisciplinary research, and include climate adaptation or adaptation angle in the research. And finally, to include clear mechanisms to upscale lessons from a community to the upper levels to create broad insights for policy development.
Thank you. All right. Prateep?
I think the idea of a social contract is very attractive, both academically and also from a very community perspective, So my first reaction is that Fikret has really nicely laid out the broad contours of the social contract. All the 20 chapters really speak to the key elements of a social contract that is required. But I am also kind of, cognizant of the fact that he kind of, didn't. I was thinking that the last chapter would be the social contract. Here is how it looks like. But I think it is, I don't know whether it is deliberate that it didn't do it in the spirit of, complexity and the spirit of, providing options to others like he always does. But to my mind, a social contract, if we have to work on it, would look something like the book itself, the well laid out 20 chapters, the key elements of it. But I would also like to argue something. To my mind, and also kind of going through the book recently, is that it could be the social contract could be a creative combination of both Hobbes and Rousseau's ideas. So of course, Hobbes was telling us that there is a need for a higher authority, there is a need for a sovereign ruler, and then Rousseau came in, and Rousseau told us that decisions taken under the oak tree and rule of law by more endogenously rather than exogenously, and all of those things. I think I would like to argue that there is still a need for a Hobbesian higher authority, but in this context of small-scale fisheries, we just need to change that higher authority from the government to the small-scale fishers itself, because there is no relationship in an unequal partnership. One is more powerful, one is less powerful. Unless you change the balance of power and give the power in the hands of the more powerless, there is no real partnership. That's going to be a fake partnership. So I would like to kind of argue for a more creative combination of both Hobbes' idea and the Rousseau's idea in terms of a social contract. And the last point about the social contract is that, are we looking at one social contract? Perhaps not. There are many social contracts at different levels, at different, magnitude that needs to take place. Of course, goes back to the 90s, focus on decentralization, devolution, and all of those nice concepts. But we are probably looking at the Herculean task of, going through, working on multiple social contracts to be able to even put our fingers on the real problem. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Running tight here. Melissa, what's your thought on this one?
Well, we're running tight, so I will just say that I think I like the title of the social contract, and I think if we could I mean, Fikret's been writing for 30 years about ways to move the social contract forward. And if we could just implement more of this, it would be amazing. And maybe part of that is to support the social contract, you have to also work on the broader political economy aspects of things to actually enable small scale fisheries to thrive.
Thank you. So before we turn the floor to Fikret to really review to us, to him, according to him, what this new social contract would look like, I know that there's so many people have joined and sent very nice messages. Javier was here before. I'm not sure he's still around, but had to run. Many people have to run. Brenda, same thing. Derek posted some nice comments, and Andres just say hi from Chile. But I do have a hand up here from Sven. Are you still there? Are you still wanting to say something? I'm giving you the microphone now. You can do that very quickly, Sven, because you were referred to a couple of times. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, if I had more time, I could tell stories about how my what? It's not muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. If I had more time, I could tell stories of how I met Fikret. But I must say that I knew him, his work, before I met him in person, and that was his work that he did originally on Turkey, which caught my attention and impressed me and moved me in directions of cooperatives and co-management and communities, etc. But I just have like a comment on the social contract idea. Fikret and I, we like Chris Benet's work. I know he has said that, and we have talked about it. And he has this intriguing title about small-scale fisheries in a paper. Small-scale fisheries rhymes with poverty. You can imagine under such circumstances that it would lead to a particular kind of social contract. So, and you may even ask whether this is an observation or it is a necessary connection. Could we, for instance, argue that as long as we have poverty, we will have small-scale fisheries? I don't know if that is the case, but how would if we change that metaphor and ask and said, small-scale fisheries rhymes with wealth? How would a social contract look under such circumstances? I assume that it will be a very different social contract, perhaps no social contract at all. Observing what is happening in Norway, small-scale fisheries are becoming richer and richer, but they are becoming fewer and fewer, and their connection with communities is simply not there as it used to be. It's a totally different social contract, and it may not be useful even under such circumstances to talk about.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sven. Yeah. All right. Fikret, really last word. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and sending comments. We would have it there for us. So, Fikret, what do you want to communicate with this title?
Right. Okay. I think a major feature of the social contract is that we're moving away from top-down management. We're moving away from top-down management. The earlier social contract, and I agree with Sven, I agree with Prateep, there's more than one social contract, but it used to be where the government will tell you what to do. That has been changing, even though small-scale fisheries in some areas have disappeared or have different kinds of relationships. It's still true that this idea of a government telling the small-scale fishermen or foresters or agriculturalists what they should be doing has been changing, and that's a fundamental change. It has been going on for some time, and I don't think that's going to be reversed. Social contracts are many, and they do look different. In the book, I make an example of climate change, where This is one of the later chapters in the book that talks about how the Inuit of the Canadian Western Arctic started seeing climate change in the 90s. And when they communicated this to the government, their reports were thrown in the garbage. They said, we're seeing electrical storms, and the government said, it's not possible in the high Arctic, and threw it out. So here's a case where the social contract would mean the government will tell you when there's a problem and will protect you. It's been reversed. The Inuit are saying, we're seeing something you're not seeing, and we are the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, because all the models, in fact, show that climate change would be noticed in the Arctic, at least, especially in the North American Arctic first, and they are telling the rest of Canada, including the government, that this is what we're seeing and this is how we're adjusting. So these are different social contracts, and but it applies to more than small-scale fisheries. It's all over the place. It's all over the different areas. I was communicating with Mika Trimble in Uruguay, one of our former students. I can't see who's there because this particular setup doesn't let me see who's there. But
that's fine.
She sent me a recent paper. She's working on water issues, and the water decisions on water now look very different in her part of the world. Looking at 3 countries, and of course, South America was the first to suffer from the Chicago School neoliberalism, where everything is privatized, and there's citizens boards, there's co-management, there's participatory governance, which is just amazing, given that some of this history in Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, Argentina goes back to 1970s of giving priority to privatization rather than citizen power. So there's some very interesting stuff happening, and it's more than fisheries.
Right.
We did fisheries.
Sorry, I mean,
okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Sorry about this, because you might see already that people are popping in because the next session is about to start. But you know what? Go read the book, right? For those who haven't really read it yet, and there's a lot of good, really good answers in there as well for some of the questions that we're asking here. I would really like to thank everyone, starting from Melissa, Prateep, Iranga, and of course, Fikret, for joining the session, and Fikret for writing the book. The book, of course, cannot be done without the production of the team. And in particular, I would like to acknowledge my colleague, Vesna Karashi, for the production of this beautiful book. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. And we'll be seeing you again very soon. Bye-bye.